the Christmas story that we just witnessed here was not the first, but in fact was the very last of the stories written about Jesus' life. And it was written nearly 120 years after he had died. A long time. The only earlier account of a birth story is in Matthew. This one was from the Gospel of Luke. It's from Matthew. And Matthew, as some of you may know, is the story about the Magi, the wise men that arrived in Bethlehem with gifts, and they were following a star which stopped dead over Bethlehem. And in that story, there was no manger, there was no stable, there were no shepherds, and there were no angels. It was a completely different telling of the birth story. And in fact, some people even think Jesus might have been a toddler by the time the Magi got there, if they did at all. Nothing is certain. Through the centuries, these two stories, Luke's story with the shepherds and the manger, and Matthew's story with the Magi and the star, have been combined in all kinds of interesting ways. And that's evidenced in our nativity sets, which have everything, including the Magi there. And also in the different way that we tell the story. Unfortunately, though, I think we got off the track with these stories when we began to understand them as historical, factual truth. The literalizing of the story only happened over the last 500 years. And they were never written with that intent. They were never written as fact. That's a fact. The literal, sadly, I also believe it is trying to believe these stories as historical fact that has driven countless thousands of churchgoers away from the church. In the 21st century, angels and wise men and shepherds and stables and stars that stop dead just don't make much sense. But I tell you, Luke and Matthew never intended these stories to be understood literally. They would be shocked to learn that we have made the story so small. Rather, they wrote with metaphor and symbol to try to capture the Spirit of God experienced in this Jesus of Nazareth. The Spirit of God that they saw in those early followers. A God Spirit that gave the people hope in their oppressive lives. A God Spirit that gave the people peace in a time of horrific violence. A God Spirit that gave people love and compassion in a time of fear. In a lot of ways, not unlike our own time. These fanciful birth stories were created to try to capture in metaphor the amazing presence of God in Jesus, in his life, rather than who he was at birth. Every element of the Christmas story is intended to be larger-than-life symbols of God's reign on earth. Mary and Joseph, simple peasants, become symbol of God's, symbolize that God is birthed in all of humanity, not just in the wealthy and educated. The stable and manger become symbol of God's presence in the poorest places of the world and not just in the temples and palaces. The shepherds, among the most marginalized of people in Jesus' time, they were right down there with lepers, symbolize that God's message is for everyone. The kingdom of God is for everyone. No one is left out. The star that stops in its tracks tells us that over all of the earth, God reigns, not Caesar. The Magi, wise ones from distant lands, symbolize that the Spirit of God is to be known in every nation. It is no longer a God for a chosen few. It is a God for everyone. And angels, all those angels singing with joyful abandon tell us that the whole earth, in fact the whole cosmos, is filled with the presence and Spirit of God. Matthew and Luke wrote these stories, each in their own way, to tell the world that Jesus showed us through his life the very presence of God on earth. A presence that each of us is called to bring out in our own lives and our own relationships. This presence, the Spirit of God within us and around us, is the greatest of gifts. The presence of God in our hearts, in our lives, and our world is the greatest of gifts, rooted in love and hope and peace and joy. This past Sunday morning, I was clear that for me, not believing the story to be historically true in no way diminishes the importance of the story. I still put out my nativity set. It's the first thing that comes out of the Christmas box every year. And it's the last thing to go away. Because it becomes a reminder for me of the presence of God in my own life. The story is symbol of the power of God and the God met in Jesus brings me to a deeper understanding of the work of the Spirit. The carol medley you are about to hear, and you are welcome to sing along wherever you feel you can, captures most of the Christmas story elements, both from Luke and Matthew. They're all in there. But I invite each of you to hear these familiar carols with new ears this night. Or as I said at home last night, to hear these with new eyes. Good luck with that. To hear the deeper symbolic meaning, as Luke and Matthew originally intended. Perhaps you will hear and feel the presence of God. That presence of God so embodied by Jesus, that presence of God so experienced by his followers, that presence of God that is still with us today.